The mashed potatoes were getting cold on my plate as I watched my 24-year-old nephew, Jake, lean back in his chair at my sister Patricia's Thanksgiving table, pointing his finger directly at my face with the cruelest smile I had ever seen. His voice cut through the warm family atmosphere like a blade through silk when he declared, "Face it, Uncle Boston, you're just a nobody who couldn't make it in the real world like me." The entire dining room fell silent, except for the soft ticking of Patricia's grandfather clock, and I felt every pair of eyes burning into my skin as humiliation washed over me like ice water, remembering how this same young man used to call me his hero. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity as Jake's words echoed in my head. I stared down at my untouched turkey dinner, watching the gravy congeal while trying to process what had just happened. The same kid who used to run to me with scraped knees and homework problems had just destroyed me in front of our entire family on what was supposed to be a day of gratitude and togetherness. My mind drifted back 12 years to when Jake was just a scared 12-year-old boy whose world had been turned upside down by his parents' messy divorce. Patricia had been working double shifts at the hospital just to keep their small apartment, and Jake was struggling in school, angry at the world and taking it out on everyone around him. I stepped in without hesitation, picking him up from school 3 days a week, teaching him how to throw a curveball in the backyard until the streetlights came on, and helping him with algebra problems that made him want to punch holes in the wall. I remembered the Saturday mornings we spent at Denny's, where Jake would order chocolate chip pancakes and tell me about his dreams of becoming successful, like the businessmen he saw on television. He wanted to wear expensive suits and drive luxury cars, but more than anything, he wanted to make his mom proud after everything she had sacrificed for him. I encouraged those dreams even when other family members dismissed them as childish fantasies. When Jake turned 16, I bought him his first car, a used Honda Civic with 120,000 miles on it, but it was his ticket to freedom and responsibility. I taught him how to check the oil change a tire and navigate the insurance process because Patricia was too overwhelmed to handle those details. Jake hugged me that day and promised he would never forget what I had done for him. College application season brought new challenges when Patricia realized she could not afford the fees for Jake to apply to decent universities. Without telling her, I quietly paid for his applications to 8 different schools, including the state university, where he eventually earned his degree in business administration. When he graduated summa cum laude 3 years ago, Jake thanked me in his speech, calling me the father figure who never gave up on him. But somewhere between graduation and landing his current position as a junior analyst at Morrison Financial Group, something had changed in Jake. The grateful young man I had mentored had transformed into someone I barely recognized, someone who apparently saw me as beneath him now that he wore a suit to work every day and earned a steady paycheck with benefits. My own situation had deteriorated rapidly over the past 6 months, when my digital marketing consultancy lost 3 major clients to budget cuts and economic uncertainty. The clothing retailer that had been my biggest account for 4 years suddenly terminated our contract when their parent company decided to bring all marketing functions in-house. 2 weeks later, the local restaurant chain that provided my second largest revenue stream filed for bankruptcy after struggling to recover from pandemic losses that never fully healed. The third client, a medical equipment distributor, simply stopped returning my phone calls and emails until their secretary finally informed me they were switching to a larger agency in Chicago. 26 months of building relationships, understanding their unique challenges, and delivering consistent results meant nothing when corporate decision-makers decided to prioritize cost savings over partnership loyalty. I had been living off my savings account for 3 months, watching the balance drop lower each week while sending out proposals that seemed to disappear into digital black holes. Pride kept me from asking family members for financial help, especially knowing that Patricia was still struggling to pay off student loans from her nursing degree, and dealing with her own mounting credit card debt. The conversation at dinner had turned to everyone's career updates when Patricia asked me about my business. I had tried to keep my response optimistic, mentioning that I was exploring new opportunities and building relationships with potential clients, but Jake immediately sensed weakness in my carefully worded explanation. His questions became increasingly aggressive, demanding specific details about my revenue and client roster that I was obviously reluctant to share. That was when Jake erupted into the cruel laughter that shattered whatever remained of our relationship. But as I sat there absorbing his verbal attack, Patricia quietly rose from her seat and walked toward the kitchen, motioning with her eyes for me to follow her. The rest of the family continued eating in uncomfortable silence, while I excused myself and joined my sister near the sink. Patricia's voice was barely above a whisper when she revealed the bombshell that changed everything. "Boston, I need to tell you something that I should have said months ago. I have been telling Jake that you borrowed $15,000 from me last year and never paid it back." The words hit me like a physical blow because they were completely fabricated. I had never borrowed money from Patricia in my entire adult life. In fact, I had been the one lending her money over the years whenever emergencies arose, and she had always paid me back eventually, though sometimes it took several months. "Why would you tell him that?" I asked, feeling my stomach twist into knots. Patricia looked down at her hands, unable to meet my eyes. "Because I was jealous, Boston. You were always the successful one, the one everyone looked up to. And when your business started struggling, I guess I wanted Jake to see that you were not perfect. I wanted him to respect me more than he respected you." The confession left me speechless as I realized that my own sister had been systematically poisoning my relationship with Jake for months, feeding him lies designed to diminish me in his eyes. Every snide comment, every dismissive look, every moment of disrespect had been built on Patricia's deliberate deception. I returned to the dining room with Patricia's betrayal churning in my mind, trying to process how my own sister could have sabotaged me so completely. The family was making awkward small talk about the weather and football scores, clearly trying to pretend that Jake's outburst had never happened, but the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jake, however, seemed energized by what he perceived as successful dominance over me. His posture had straightened, his voice had grown louder, and he began regaling the table with stories about his importance at Morrison Financial Group. He described his role as a junior analyst, like he was running the entire company, dropping his boss's name, Tyler Morrison, repeatedly, while explaining how he was being considered for a major promotion that would put him in charge of client relationships. Tyler Morrison himself told me that I have the best analytical mind he has seen in years. Jake announced, cutting his turkey with theatrical precision. He said, "I am exactly the kind of forward-thinking employee that Morrison Financial needs to stay competitive in today's market." Uncle Frank, Patricia's older brother, who had driven down from Portland for the holiday, nodded politely while clearly trying to steer the conversation toward safer territory. "That sounds like a great opportunity, Jake. Your mother must be very proud of your progress." But Jake was not interested in gracious acceptance of compliments. His success was meaningless unless it was measured against someone else's failure, and I had become his preferred target for comparison. He turned his attention back to me with renewed vigor, his eyes bright with malicious pleasure. "The difference between Uncle Boston and me," he continued, "is that I understand how to succeed in the real world. I do not sit around waiting for clients to call me back or making excuses about economic conditions. I go out there and make things happen, which is why Tyler trusts me with the firm's most important accounts." Aunt Helen, Frank's wife, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Jake, maybe we should talk about something else. This is supposed to be a family celebration." "No, I think this is important," Jake replied, his voice taking on a lecturing tone that made my skin crawl. "Uncle Boston needs to understand that his approach to business is completely outdated. You cannot run a consultancy like it is still 1995. You need to adapt, innovate, and most importantly, you need to have the skills that clients actually want to pay for. He paused to take a sip of wine before delivering his next verbal assault. The truth is, Uncle Boston never really had what it takes to compete at the highest levels. His business worked for a while because the market was less sophisticated, but now that companies have access to real professionals, his little operation was bound to fail. My cousin Sarah Frank's daughter, who worked as a teacher in Seattle, finally spoke up. "Jake, I think you are being unnecessarily harsh. Everyone goes through difficult periods in their careers." Jake's response revealed just how far he had fallen from the respectful young man I once knew. "Sarah, with all due respect, you are a public school teacher. You do not really understand how competitive business works. In my world, results are the only thing that matters, and Uncle Boston simply has not delivered results." The comment about Sarah's profession was so dismissive and cruel that even Patricia looked shocked. Sarah had dedicated her life to educating children in underserved communities, often spending her own money on classroom supplies, and Jake had just reduced her noble calling to something insignificant. But Jake was not finished with his character assassination. He brought up my divorce from Jennifer 2 years ago, describing it as evidence of my inability to maintain important relationships. He mentioned my decision not to have children, suggesting that it demonstrated a lack of commitment and responsibility. Every personal detail that should have been off-limits in family conversation became ammunition for his attack. "The pattern is obvious," Jake declared, gesturing with his fork like he was presenting evidence in a courtroom. "Failed marriage, no kids, declining business, living off savings instead of generating income. These are not the hallmarks of a successful man." Uncle Frank tried once more to intervene. "Jake, I think you have made your point. Let us try to enjoy the rest of our meal." But Jake was too intoxicated by his perceived power to stop. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his smartphone, opening the camera app with a grin that made my blood run cold. "Actually, I think my coworkers would find this pretty entertaining. They are always talking about their crazy family members, and I never had any good stories to share." He pointed the phone's camera directly at me and pressed the record button. "Hey everyone at Morrison Financial. I want you to meet my Uncle Boston, the guy who likes to give career advice, but cannot even keep his own business running." The sight of that phone camera recording my humiliation was the final straw. Every emotion I had been suppressing since Jake's first cruel comment came rushing to the surface. But instead of the explosion he was clearly hoping to provoke, I felt something else entirely. A cold, calculating clarity settled over me as I remembered something crucial that Jake had no idea about. Tyler Morrison. Jake's boss, the man whose name he had been dropping all evening like a badge of honor. Tyler Morrison was not just some random executive who happened to employ my nephew. Tyler Morrison was my college roommate and fraternity brother at State University, one of my closest friends for 4 years of undergraduate study. We had lost touch after graduation when Tyler moved to New York for his MBA program, and I stayed local to start my first business venture. But 2 years ago, we had reconnected through social media and had been having periodic phone conversations about life, business, and the challenges of building something meaningful in an uncertain economy. I suddenly recalled our most recent conversation just 3 weeks ago when Tyler had mentioned being frustrated with staffing issues at his firm. He had inherited several problem employees when he took over Morrison Financial from his retiring father, and he was struggling to decide which ones could be reformed and which ones needed to be replaced. Tyler had specifically mentioned having to make some difficult personnel decisions before the end of the year. Jake continued filming my reaction, completely unaware that he was documenting his own downfall. He began bragging about his sophisticated understanding of financial markets and his ability to impress clients with his analytical insights. But then he made a crucial mistake that would soon cost him everything. "The best part about working for Tyler Morrison," he said, still recording, "is that he is so trusting that I can get away with anything. I have been padding my expense reports for months, and he never questions a single receipt." Plus, there is this colleague named Amanda who does all the research work, but I take credit for her analysis in my presentations. Tyler thinks I am some kind of genius, but really I am just smarter than everyone else about working the system. My mouth went dry as I realized that Jake had just confessed to fraud and workplace theft while recording himself. But more importantly, he had revealed that he was stealing credit from Amanda, who I suddenly remembered Tyler mentioning as his niece, who had recently joined the firm as a research analyst. Jake was not just any problem employee that Tyler was considering terminating. He was actively stealing from the company and taking credit for the work of Tyler's own family member, all while demonstrating the exact kind of arrogance and lack of integrity that Tyler despised in business relationships. As Jake continued his recorded monologue about my failures and his superiority, I excused myself from the table with a calm that surprised everyone, including myself. "I need to make a quick phone call," I said, standing up slowly and walking toward the bathroom with deliberate steps. The time for enduring humiliation was over. Jake had no idea that he had just handed me the weapons I needed to destroy his career and vindicate myself in one decisive action. But more than revenge, I was about to reconnect with an old friend who could offer me something far more valuable than satisfaction. A genuine opportunity to rebuild my life on a foundation stronger than anything I had constructed before. I locked the bathroom door behind me and sat down on the edge of Patricia's bathtub, pulling out my phone with hands that were surprisingly steady, despite everything that had just happened. Jake's voice was still audible through the thin walls as he continued his performance for the camera, describing my various inadequacies for his future audience at Morrison Financial. But his words were triggering a flood of memories about Tyler Morrison that I had not thought about in months. Tyler and I had lived together in the Delta Sigma Pi house during our junior and senior years at State University, sharing late-night conversations about our dreams and fears while struggling through advanced economics courses that nearly broke both of our spirits. Tyler had always been the more ambitious one, talking about following his father into the family financial services business and eventually expanding it beyond their small regional footprint. I preferred the creative aspects of business gravitating toward marketing and communications rather than the numbers-driven world that fascinated Tyler. We complemented each other perfectly during group projects, with Tyler handling financial analysis, while I developed presentation strategies and client relationship approaches. Our friendship had deepened during Tyler's personal crisis in senior year when his longtime girlfriend Chelsea broke up with him 2 weeks before graduation, claiming that he was too focused on his career ambitions to be emotionally available for a serious relationship. Tyler had been devastated, questioning everything about his priorities and his vision for the future. I spent countless hours that final semester helping Tyler work through his doubts, reminding him that success in business did not require sacrificing his capacity for meaningful relationships. We had long discussions about the importance of treating employees and clients with genuine respect rather than viewing them as mere instruments for profit generation. After graduation, Tyler moved to New York to pursue his MBA at Columbia, while I stayed in state to launch my first marketing venture with 2 other classmates. We exchanged emails and phone calls regularly during his first year of graduate school, but the demands of building a business and his intensive academic schedule gradually reduced our contact to holiday greetings and occasional social media interactions. When Tyler returned home 5 years later to join his father's firm, we met for dinner a few times, but our lives had moved in different directions. He was focused on modernizing Morrison Financial and expanding their client base, while I was dealing with the challenges of my growing consultancy and my developing relationship with Jennifer. The social media reconnection 2 years ago had been unexpected, but genuinely warmth-filled. Tyler had sent me a friend request along with a message saying he had been thinking about our college days and wondering how I was doing. We began exchanging messages about our respective business experiences, our shared frustration with economic uncertainty, and our mutual amazement at how quickly time had passed since graduation. Our phone conversations had become more frequent over the past year, especially after Tyler inherited full control of Morrison Financial following his father's retirement. He often called me for advice about managing employees and building company culture, remembering my natural ability to understand what motivated people and how to bring out their best performance. 3 weeks ago, Tyler had sounded particularly stressed during our conversation. He explained that his father had been too lenient with several employees who were not meeting basic standards of professionalism and productivity. Some had been with the company for years, making termination decisions politically complicated, but Tyler knew that tolerating poor performance was undermining the morale of good employees. I inherited 3 or 4 people who probably should have been fired years ago, Tyler had told me. But my father believed in giving everyone multiple chances sometimes to the detriment of the overall team. I am trying to document performance issues carefully so that when I do make changes, they are based on clear evidence rather than personal impressions. He had specifically mentioned having one employee who was technically competent, but displayed an attitude problem that was affecting relationships with both colleagues and clients. This person thinks that talent excuses arrogance, Tyler had said, but our clients value humility and teamwork just as much as analytical skills. I am building a case for termination, but I need one more significant incident to make the decision legally defensible. I also remembered Tyler mentioning his niece Amanda, who had joined Morrison Financial 6 months ago as a research analyst after graduating from the same state university program that Tyler and I had completed years earlier. Amanda is everything I hope for in a young employee, Tyler had said proudly. She is smart, hardworking, and collaborative. She reminds me of us back in college, focused on doing excellent work without needing to tear other people down. Now sitting in Patricia's bathroom while listening to Jake brag about stealing Amanda's work and defrauding Tyler's expense account, I realized that my nephew was exactly the type of employee Tyler had been planning to eliminate. Jake had no idea that his behavior had already put him on thin ice with management, or that his boss valued integrity and teamwork above the individual performance metrics that Jake believed were protecting his job. But Jake's confession about taking credit for Amanda's research work elevated his misconduct from merely problematic to absolutely unforgivable. Tyler was not just Amanda's boss. He was her uncle and mentor, someone who had specifically hired her because he believed in her potential and wanted to give her opportunities to grow professionally. Learning that Jake had been systematically stealing credit for Amanda's contributions, while portraying her as less capable, would trigger every protective instinct Tyler possessed. And discovering that Jake had been mocking Tyler behind his back, calling him naive and easy to manipulate, would destroy any remaining possibility of redemption or second chances. I scrolled through my phone contacts until I found Tyler's number, noting that it was only 7:30 in the evening on Thanksgiving Day. Tyler was probably at home with his own family, enjoying the holiday, without any awareness that one of his employees was currently filming a video that would end his career at Morrison Financial. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. Jake thought he was documenting my humiliation for his co-workers' entertainment, but instead, he was creating evidence of his own professional misconduct while unknowingly targeting the uncle of his boss's favorite employee. As I prepared to make the call that would change everything, I felt a sense of calm determination rather than vindictive excitement. This was not about revenge or personal satisfaction. This was about justice, accountability, and the natural consequences that follow when someone chooses cruelty and dishonesty over integrity and respect. Jake had spent the evening trying to demonstrate his superiority by tearing me down, but he was about to learn that true power comes from building genuine relationships based on mutual trust and shared values. Tyler and I had maintained our friendship across years and geographic distance because we treated each other with consistent respect and authenticity. Jake's approach to relationships was purely transactional and manipulative. He viewed Tyler as a resource to be exploited rather than a leader to be respected. He saw Amanda as competition to be undermined rather than a colleague to be supported. And he treated me as a target for public humiliation rather than a family member deserving basic dignity. I pressed Tyler's contact information and selected the FaceTime option, knowing that a video call would carry more emotional impact than a simple phone conversation. While the call connected, I could hear Jake's voice growing louder in the dining room, apparently building toward some kind of crescendo in his recorded performance. The timing could not have been more perfect. In about 60 seconds, Jake would discover that the business world was much smaller and more interconnected than his arrogance had allowed him to imagine. Tyler's face appeared on my phone screen. After 3 rings, his familiar smile immediately warming my spirits, despite the chaos swirling around me. He was sitting in what appeared to be his home office, wearing a casual sweater rather than his usual business attire, and there were sounds of family conversation and laughter in the background. "Boston, great to hear from you, buddy," Tyler said, his voice carrying genuine enthusiasm. "Happy Thanksgiving. How are you doing?" "Tyler, good to see you too," I replied, keeping my voice low so the family in the dining room would not overhear our conversation. "I hope I am not interrupting your family time, but something has come up that I think you need to know about." Tyler's expression shifted slightly as he picked up the serious undertone in my voice. "No problem at all. What is going on?" I took a deep breath and chose my words carefully. "I am at my sister's house for Thanksgiving dinner, and I have been having an interesting conversation with my nephew, Jake, about his job. He mentioned that he works for you at Morrison Financial." Tyler's eyebrows rose with surprise and recognition. Jake Patterson is your nephew." "Wow, what a small world. He mentioned having family in the area, but I had no idea you two were related." The slight tension in Tyler's voice when he said Jake's name told me everything I needed to know about their professional relationship. My old friend was clearly trying to be diplomatic, but his body language suggested that Jake's name was not associated with positive thoughts. "Tyler, I need to be direct with you about something," I continued. "Jake has been sharing some details about his work that I think you should be aware of. Specifically, he has been bragging about padding his expense reports and taking credit for research work done by your analyst Amanda." Tyler's face went completely still, his casual demeanor evaporating as the implications of my words sank in. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Boston? Those are serious accusations. He just finished telling our entire family about it while filming a video for his coworkers," I explained. "He seemed to think it demonstrated his cleverness and your naivety. He also made some very disrespectful comments about Amanda's capabilities." Tyler set down whatever he had been holding and leaned closer to the camera. "Boston, this is exactly the kind of behavior I have been trying to document. Jake has been on thin ice for months due to attitude problems and client complaints, but I needed concrete evidence of misconduct to justify termination." He paused, running his hand through his hair with visible frustration. "And Amanda is not just any employee. She is my niece, and she is one of the most talented analysts we have ever hired. The idea that Jake has been stealing credit for her work while undermining her reputation makes me absolutely furious." I felt a surge of vindication hearing Tyler confirm what I had suspected about Jake's precarious employment status. "Tyler, I think Jake has no idea how much trouble he is in. He seems to believe that his analytical skills make him indispensable regardless of his behavior." "That is exactly his problem," Tyler replied, his voice hardening with professional resolve. "He thinks that producing decent work gives him license to treat colleagues poorly and ignore company policies. But Morrison Financial is built on integrity and teamwork, not individual performance, at the expense of everything else." Tyler was quiet for a moment, clearly processing the information I had provided and considering his options. When he spoke again, his tone carried the authority of someone accustomed to making difficult business decisions. "Boston, I need to ask you a favor," he said. "I was planning to terminate Jake on Monday morning anyway, but this gives me everything I need to make the decision immediately. Would you be willing to bring Jake over to speak with me while you are still on the call? I want to address this situation directly and professionally." The request was exactly what I had been hoping for without quite realizing it. "Are you sure you want to handle this on Thanksgiving? I do not want to ruin your family time." Tyler shook his head firmly. "This cannot wait until Monday. If Jake is filming videos about defrauding our expense account and stealing Amanda's work, I need to shut that down immediately before he shares them with anyone else. Plus, I owe it to Amanda to address this misconduct as soon as possible." He leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from anger to something approaching satisfaction. Besides, there is some poetic justice in Jake learning about consequences while surrounded by family members who can witness his choices. Maybe it will make the lesson more memorable. I appreciated Tyler's direct approach to the situation, but I also wanted to make sure he understood the full context of what had been happening at dinner. "Tyler, I should mention that Jake has been pretty cruel to me tonight. He has been mocking my business struggles and calling me a failure in front of our entire family. This conversation with you is not about revenge, but I want you to know that his behavior extends beyond workplace misconduct." Tyler's face softened with sympathy and understanding. "Boston, I am so sorry you had to endure that. But honestly, it fits perfectly with what I have observed about Jake's character at work. He seems to believe that putting other people down somehow elevates his own status." He shifted forward again, his voice taking on a more personal tone. "You know, I have been thinking about reaching out to you regarding some potential consulting opportunities at Morrison Financial. We are looking to expand our marketing capabilities, and I remember how talented you were at understanding client relationships and communication strategies." The unexpected offer hit me like a lightning bolt of hope in the middle of what had been the worst day I had experienced in months. "Tyler, that is incredibly generous, but I do not want you to feel obligated because of this situation with Jake." "This has nothing to do with Jake," Tyler replied with conviction. "I have been considering bringing in external marketing expertise for our client acquisition strategy, and your background is exactly what we need. I was actually planning to call you next week to discuss it, but circumstances have accelerated the timeline." He smiled for the first time since our conversation had turned serious. "Besides, who better to help us build authentic client relationships than someone who maintains genuine friendships across decades? Our industry is too focused on short-term transactions instead of long-term partnerships." I felt a wave of gratitude toward my old friend that went far beyond the professional opportunity he was offering. Tyler was demonstrating exactly the kind of integrity and loyalty that had made our college friendship so meaningful, and his willingness to separate his business relationship with me from his personnel issues with Jake showed remarkable character. "All right, Tyler," I said, standing up and preparing to return to the dining room. "Let me go get Jake and introduce him to his boss, but I should warn you he is currently in the middle of filming some kind of social media video where he has been mocking both of us." Tyler's smile took on a slightly predatory edge. "Even better. Let him keep recording. I want there to be a clear record of this conversation for our human resources documentation." As I unlocked the bathroom door and prepared to return to the family dinner that was about to become a professional reckoning, I reflected on the strange way that Tyler's friendship had reappeared in my life, exactly when I needed it most. Jake had tried to humiliate me by contrasting his career success with my business struggles, but his arrogance had actually created an opportunity for me to reconnect with someone who valued my skills and character. The next few minutes would determine whether Jake learned from this experience or simply found new ways to blame external circumstances for his problems. But regardless of how he responded, justice was about to be served with surgical precision by someone who understood exactly how much damage Jake had been doing to himself and others. I walked back into the dining room carrying my phone with Tyler still visible on the FaceTime screen, though I held the device close to my chest so Jake could not see who was on the call. The family was still seated around Patricia's dining table, But the atmosphere had grown even more uncomfortable during my absence. Jake was finishing his recorded monologue with what appeared to be a grand finale about the difference between winners and losers in American business. The bottom line, Jake was saying to his phone camera, is that some people adapt to changing markets, and some people make excuses. Uncle Boston represents everything that is wrong with the older generation of entrepreneurs who think they can coast on past success instead of innovating for the future. He was so absorbed in his performance that he did not notice me approaching until I was standing directly beside his chair. The rest of the family looked up at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern, clearly wondering how I was going to respond to Jake's extended character assassination. "Jake," I said, keeping my voice calm and measured, "I would like to introduce you to someone special. I think you will find this conversation very interesting." Jake looked up at me with skeptical amusement, clearly assuming that I was about to present some family member or friend who would be impressed by his corporate success. "Sure, Uncle Boston. I am always happy to network with successful people." I turned my phone around so Tyler's face was visible to Jake and the rest of the family. "Jake, I would like you to meet Tyler Morrison." The color drained from Jake's face so quickly that I thought he might faint. His phone slipped from his hand and clattered onto Patricia's hardwood floor as his mouth opened and closed without producing any sound. The transformation from confident predator to terrified prey happened in less than 3 seconds. Hello, Jake?" Tyler said, his voice carrying professional courtesy underlaid with unmistakable authority. "I hope you are having a pleasant Thanksgiving with your family." Jake's eyes darted around the table as if looking for an escape route, but every family member was staring at him with fascination and growing understanding of what was happening. Uncle Frank leaned forward with interest, while Aunt Helen covered her mouth with her hand. Patricia looked confused but alarmed, while Cousin Sarah had the expression of someone watching a train wreck in slow motion. "Mr. Morrison," Jake finally managed to stammer, "I did not expect to hear from you on the holiday. Is everything all right at the office?" Tyler's smile was perfectly professional and completely terrifying. "Actually, Jake, I was just having a wonderful conversation with my old college friend Boston about some interesting information regarding your recent work performance. Would you mind explaining to me your approach to expense reporting?" The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Jake's face went from pale to red to pale again as he realized that Tyler had been listening to his bragging about defrauding company expense accounts. His hand started to shake slightly as the magnitude of his situation began to sink in. "Sir, I think there may have been some misunderstanding," Jake said, his voice cracking with desperation. "I have always followed all company policies regarding expense reporting." Tyler's expression did not change, but his tone became incrementally colder. "Jake, I have been monitoring our expense account irregularities for the past 2 months. We have documentation of restaurant charges that exceed reasonable business meal costs, hotel expenses for trips that were not pre-approved, and transportation costs that do not align with your submitted itineraries." He paused to let the implications sink in before continuing. "But more importantly, I am very interested in your comments about taking credit for Amanda's research work. As you know, Amanda is not just a valued employee. She is my niece." Jake's face went ashen as this final piece of information destroyed whatever remaining hope he might have harbored for talking his way out of trouble. The family watched in stunned silence as Jake's carefully constructed facade of professional competence crumbled in real time. "Mr. Morrison, I never said anything about Amanda." Jake protested weakly, even though everyone at the table had clearly heard him bragging about stealing her work just minutes earlier. Tyler's response was swift and decisive. "Jake, I do not appreciate being lied to, especially when the conversation was recorded. Your own video documentation includes explicit admissions of expense fraud and taking credit for colleagues' contributions." Uncle Frank cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps we should give Jake and Mr. Morrison some privacy for their business discussion." but Tyler shook his head politely. Actually, I think it is appropriate for Jake's family to understand the situation. This affects more than just his employment. It reflects his character and integrity. He turned his attention back to Jake, with the focused intensity of someone delivering a well-deserved verdict. Jake, based on your admitted violations of company expense policies and your documented theft of Amanda's intellectual contributions, I am terminating your employment with Morrison Financial effective immediately. The words hit Jake like physical blows. He started to hyperventilate, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid as panic set in. Mr. Morrison, please, I can explain everything. I was just joking around with my family. I would never actually do those things. Tyler's voice remained steady and professional. Jake, security will escort you from the building on Monday morning to collect your personal belongings. Your access to company systems has already been revoked, and we will be conducting a full audit of your expense reports and project contributions. Jake tried one more desperate appeal. Sir, I have learned my lesson. This will never happen again. I am a valuable employee who just made some poor judgment calls. But Tyler's decision was final and non-negotiable. Jake, this was not a momentary lapse in judgment. This represents a pattern of dishonesty and disrespect that is incompatible with our company values. The decision is final. As Jake sat in his chair looking utterly defeated, Tyler's expression softened slightly as he addressed me. Boston, I want to thank you for bringing this situation to my attention. Your integrity and loyalty to honest business practices is exactly why I respect you so much. He smiled warmly before delivering his final surprise of the evening. And, as I mentioned earlier, I would like to offer you a consulting contract with Morrison Financial. We need someone with your expertise in client relationship management and digital marketing strategy. The contract would be worth approximately $60,000 over 6 months, with potential for extension based on results. The offer was more money than I had earned in the previous 12 months combined. Jake's attempt to humiliate me had resulted in the best professional opportunity I had received in years, while his own career had been destroyed by his arrogance and dishonesty. Patricia looked back and forth between Jake and me with dawning comprehension of how completely the evening's power dynamic had shifted. The nephew who had been mocking my failures was now unemployed and facing potential legal consequences for fraud, while I had just received a lucrative contract from his former boss. Tyler, I accept your offer gratefully, I said, unable to keep the smile off my face. I look forward to working together again after all these years. Tyler nodded with satisfaction. Excellent. I will have our legal team prepare the contract documents tomorrow, and we can begin planning your engagement as soon as you are ready. As Tyler ended the FaceTime call, and Jake sat in stunned silence processing the wreckage of his career, I realized that genuine relationships and authentic character had just triumphed over manipulation and arrogance in the most decisive way possible. The silence that followed Tyler's departure from the video call was absolutely deafening. Jake sat motionless in his chair, staring at the spot where Tyler's face had disappeared from my phone screen, as if he could will the conversation back into existence and somehow change its outcome. His breathing had become shallow and irregular, and I could see sweat beading on his forehead, despite the comfortable temperature in Patricia's dining room. Uncle Frank was the first to speak, his voice gentle but firm. Jake, I think you owe your Uncle Boston a sincere apology. What happened here tonight was completely unacceptable. But Jake seemed incapable of processing anything beyond his immediate crisis. I have to call Mr. Morrison back, he said, reaching for his phone with trembling hands. I need to explain that this was all a misunderstanding. He cannot just fire me over a family dinner conversation. Patricia finally found her voice, though it was strained with shock and embarrassment. Jake, honey, maybe you should take some time to think before you do anything else. This situation is very serious. Jake's response revealed just how little he understood about professional consequences and personal accountability. "This is all Uncle Boston's fault," he declared, his panic transforming into misdirected anger. "He deliberately sabotaged my career because he was jealous of my success." The accusation was so absurd and self-serving that even Patricia looked offended. Aunt Helen shook her head in disbelief, while Cousin Sarah stared at Jake with undisguised disappointment. "Jake?" I said, keeping my voice calm despite my rising frustration. "Tyler Morrison has been documenting your performance problems for months. Your behavior tonight simply provided the final evidence he needed to justify a decision he was already planning to make." But Jake was too deep in denial to accept responsibility for his actions. "You could have warned me instead of setting me up like that. You knew he was my boss, and you deliberately got me to say things that would get me in trouble." Uncle Frank's patience finally snapped. "Jake, you are 24 years old, which is old enough to take responsibility for your choices. Nobody forced you to brag about stealing from your employer or taking credit for other people's work." He gestured around the table at our family members, all of whom were looking at Jake with various degrees of disappointment and concern. "And nobody forced you to spend the entire evening attacking Boston's character and accomplishments. You did all of that on your own." Jake's face crumpled as the reality of his situation began to penetrate his defensive anger. "But I worked so hard to get that job," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "I graduated summa cum laude. I put in 60-hour weeks. I was supposed to get promoted next year. Hard work means nothing if you couple it with dishonesty and arrogance," Aunt Helen said quietly. "Your education and long hours do not give you the right to treat people poorly or steal from your employer." Patricia, who had been silent since her earlier confession about poisoning Jake's opinion of me, finally spoke up with visible shame in her voice. "Jake, I need to tell you something that might explain part of what happened tonight." She took a deep breath before continuing. "I told you that Boston borrowed money from me and never paid it back, but that was completely untrue. I made that up because I was jealous of Boston's success, and I wanted you to think less of him." Jake stared at his mother with disbelief and growing horror. "You lied to me about Uncle Boston. All those things you told me about him being irresponsible and unreliable were false." Patricia nodded miserably. "Yes, Jake. Boston has always been generous and supportive to our family. He helped raise you when your father left, he paid for your college applications, and he never asked for anything in return. I destroyed your relationship with him because of my own insecurities." The revelation seemed to shatter whatever remained of Jake's emotional composure. He put his head in his hands and began to sob with the raw intensity of someone whose entire worldview had just collapsed. "So I ruined my career and destroyed my relationship with Uncle Boston based on lies that you fed me. The lies I told you were wrong," Patricia admitted. "But the choices you made tonight were your own. I never told you to mock Boston's business struggles or film videos bragging about fraudulent expense reports." Jake looked up at me with tears streaming down his face, his earlier arrogance completely replaced by desperate remorse. "Uncle Boston, I am so sorry. I do not know what happened to me. I became someone I do not even recognize." The apology felt genuine, but I also recognized that it was motivated more by consequences than by actual understanding of the harm he had caused. "Jake, I appreciate the apology, but you need to understand that tonight was not an isolated incident. This has been building for months. I thought about the young man I had mentored and supported through his difficult teenage years, trying to reconcile that memory with the cruel person who had attacked me just an hour earlier. The Jake I helped raise would never have treated family members with such disrespect, regardless of what his mother told him about me." Cousin Sarah leaned forward with the compassionate but firm tone she probably used with her struggling students. "Jake, I think you got caught up in trying to prove your worth by tearing other people down. But real confidence comes from building others up, not from making them feel small." Uncle Frank nodded in agreement. "Your uncle has been nothing but supportive of your dreams since you were 12 years old. When you needed help, he was there. When you succeeded, he celebrated with you. Tonight you repaid that loyalty with cruelty." Jake's shoulders shook with the weight of his recognition and regret. "I know I messed up everything. My job, my family relationships, my reputation. I do not know how to fix any of this." "You start by taking full responsibility without making excuses," I said. "And then you spend the time necessary to figure out how you became someone who thought fraud and cruelty were acceptable ways to achieve success." Patricia wiped tears from her own eyes as she addressed her son. "Jake, we both need to do some serious soul-searching about our choices and our values. This evening has shown us sides of ourselves that we should be ashamed of." As the family began to process the emotional wreckage of the evening, my phone buzzed with a text message from Tyler Morrison. "Boston, I wanted to follow up on our conversation. I meant everything I said about the consulting opportunity. This situation with Jake does not change my professional respect for your abilities. Looking forward to working together again." The message reinforced something important that had gotten lost in the drama of Jake's termination. Tyler's offer was not a consolation prize or a gesture of sympathy related to my family situation. It was a legitimate business opportunity based on our friendship and his confidence in my professional capabilities. I looked around Patricia's dining room at my family members, each of them processing the evening's events in their own way. Jake was confronting the consequences of choices that had transformed him from a promising young professional into an unemployed fraud facing potential legal consequences. Patricia was grappling with how her jealousy and deception had contributed to the destruction of multiple relationships. But Uncle Frank, Aunt Helen, and Cousin Sarah were looking at me with new respect and understanding. They had witnessed not only Jake's downfall, but also my ability to maintain dignity under attack and to leverage genuine relationships into meaningful opportunities. The evening had been painful and dramatic, but it had also revealed fundamental truths about character integrity and the long-term consequences of how we choose to treat other people. Jake and Patricia would have to live with the results of their dishonesty and cruelty, but I would move forward with new opportunities built on authentic friendships and professional respect. Justice had been served not through revenge or manipulation, but through the natural consequences that follow when genuine relationships encounter deliberate deception and arrogance. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in Tyler Morrison's office at Morrison Financial, reviewing the digital marketing strategy we had developed for their client acquisition campaign. The consulting contract had officially begun the Monday after Thanksgiving, and the work was challenging in exactly the ways I had missed during my months of struggling with unresponsive prospects and declining revenues. Tyler and I had fallen back into our old collaborative rhythm as if the intervening years had never happened. He provided analytical frameworks and financial insights, while I developed communication strategies and relationship-building approaches. The project was ahead of schedule and generating enthusiasm from both existing clients and prospective accounts. Boston. I have to say, bringing you onto this project was one of the best business decisions I have made this year. Tyler said, reviewing our latest presentation materials. Your approach to client relationships is exactly what our industry needs more of. Amanda Morrison, Tyler's niece and the research analyst whose work Jake had been stealing, knocked on the office door and entered with a stack of market analysis reports. She was a bright, hard-working young woman whose talents had been overshadowed by Jake's manipulative behavior, but now she was flourishing in an environment that recognized and rewarded her contributions. "These are the sector analysis reports for the healthcare accounts," Amanda said, placing the documents on Tyler's desk. "I have also prepared supplementary research on regulatory trends that might affect their investment strategies." Tyler smiled proudly at his niece. "Amanda, your research continues to exceed expectations. Boston, have you had a chance to review Amanda's work on the pharmaceutical sector analysis?" "I have, and it is absolutely impressive," I replied honestly. Her insights into regulatory compliance costs could help our clients avoid some very expensive mistakes. Amanda beamed at the recognition, and I reflected on how different the office atmosphere was without Jake's toxic presence. Employees were more collaborative, more willing to share ideas, and more focused on collective success rather than individual competition. Tyler had mentioned that Jake had attempted to contact him several times in the days following his termination, leaving voicemails that alternated between apologies and attempts to negotiate some form of reinstatement. But Tyler had made it clear that the decision was final and that any further contact should go through the company's legal department. "Have you heard anything about how Jake is handling his situation?" Tyler asked, apparently reading my thoughts. "Patricia told me that he is staying with her while he looks for new employment," I said. "She also mentioned that he has been struggling to get interviews because word travels quickly in your industry." Tyler nodded grimly. "Financial services is a small community, especially at the regional level. When someone is terminated for fraud and misconduct, other firms hear about it pretty quickly." Amanda looked uncomfortable discussing Jake's downfall, which spoke well of her character despite everything he had done to undermine her. "I hope he learns from this experience," she said quietly. "Everyone deserves a chance to change and grow." Her gracious attitude reminded me of conversations Tyler and I had during college about the importance of maintaining integrity, even when dealing with people who had treated us poorly. Amanda had inherited that same ethical foundation that had made Tyler such a trusted friend and business partner. My phone buzzed with a text message from Patricia asking if I would be willing to have lunch with Jake sometime in the coming week. She explained that Jake wanted to apologize in person and to try to rebuild our relationship, but she understood if I was not ready for that conversation. I showed the message to Tyler, curious about his perspective on forgiveness and second chances in professional contexts. "What do you think? Is it worth trying to salvage something from this situation?" Tyler considered the question carefully. "I think that depends on whether Jake is truly committed to understanding what went wrong, or whether he is just looking for ways to minimize the consequences of his choices." He leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "In my experience, people who blame external circumstances for their problems rarely change their underlying behavior patterns. But people who take genuine responsibility sometimes use their mistakes as catalysts for real personal growth." Amanda offered her own insight. "Maybe you could meet with him, but keep your expectations realistic. People can change, but only if they really want to." I decided to accept Patricia's request for a lunch meeting, partly because I was curious about Jake's current mindset, and partly because I believed in giving people opportunities to demonstrate growth and accountability. But I would approach the conversation with clear boundaries and realistic expectations about what could be accomplished. That evening, I returned to my apartment and reflected on the remarkable transformation my life had undergone in just 3 weeks. The consulting contract with Morrison Financial was providing financial stability and professional satisfaction that exceeded anything I had experienced in my previous independent work. Tyler was already discussing the possibility of extending our arrangement into a long-term partnership that could evolve into a permanent position if both parties remained satisfied with the results. More importantly, the entire experience had reminded me of the value of maintaining authentic relationships based on mutual respect and shared values. My friendship with Tyler had survived years of separation because we had built it on a foundation of genuine care for each other's success and well-being. Jake's attack on my character and accomplishments had been designed to elevate his own status by diminishing mine. But the strategy had backfired because it was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how real success is created and sustained. Lasting achievement comes from building others up, not from tearing them down. Patricia had learned a similar lesson about the destructive power of jealousy and deception. Her lies about my supposed financial irresponsibility had temporarily made her feel better about her own struggles, but they had ultimately damaged her relationship with both Jake and me while teaching her son that manipulation was an acceptable way to gain advantage over others. The story would have a lasting impact on our entire family's understanding of integrity, accountability, and the importance of treating people with dignity, regardless of their current circumstances. Uncle Frank, Aunt Helen, and Cousin Sarah had all reached out to express their admiration for how I had handled the situation and their disappointment in Jake's behavior. But perhaps the most important lesson was about the long-term value of maintaining authentic professional relationships. Tyler and I had stayed connected across years and geographic distance, not because we needed immediate favors from each other, but because we genuinely enjoyed each other's company and respected each other's character. When crisis arrived in both of our lives, that foundation of mutual respect had created opportunities for collaboration and support that benefited both parties. Tyler gained access to marketing expertise that would help Morrison Financial grow and serve clients more effectively. I gained access to challenging work that utilized my skills while providing financial security and professional growth. Jake would eventually learn that success built on arrogance, deception, and exploitation of others is inherently unstable and self-defeating. Real achievement requires treating colleagues, clients, and family members with consistent respect and integrity, even when temporary advantages might be gained through manipulation. The bridges we build through authentic relationships become the pathways to opportunity when circumstances change and we need support. The bridges we burn through cruelty and dishonesty eliminate possibilities for collaboration and growth that might have transformed our lives in positive ways. As I prepared for sleep that night, I felt grateful for Tyler's friendship, optimistic about my professional future, and hopeful that Jake would eventually understand how much damage he had done to himself through choices that had seemed clever and advantageous in the moment, but had proven to be catastrophically short-sighted. The truth is that how we treat people when they are struggling reveals more about our character than how we behave when everything is going well. Jake had chosen cruelty when he perceived weakness, but that choice had cost him his career and his relationships. In contrast, Tyler had chosen loyalty and support, creating opportunities for mutual success and renewed friendship. True strength comes not from dominating others, but from lifting them up. Real success is measured not by how high we climb alone, but by how many people we help climb with us. And genuine security comes not from protecting what we have by diminishing others, but from building relationships that create value for everyone involved. That is the lesson Jake learned too late to save his job at Morrison Financial, but hopefully not too late to rebuild his character and his life on a more solid foundation of integrity and respect. What do you think happens when family members prioritize jealousy and competition over support and loyalty? Have you ever experienced a situation where authentic relationships proved more valuable than professional achievements or workplace politics? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more stories about justice and personal growth, and share it with someone who might benefit from thinking about the long-term consequences of how we choose to treat the people in our lives. Thank you for listening, and I hope this story reminds you that genuine relationships and authentic character will always triumph over manipulation and arrogance, even when it seems like dishonesty has the temporary advantage.